Hi everybody, I'm Mike Miller with Hitfilm University, and today we're going to look at this Quantum Leap title design template. And first we'll go over how the template works, and then we'll talk about how I build it in case you want to create your own version. There are two versions of the template in the zip file. The first one is labeled Express and works in Express with no add-ons. The second version is labeled Pro, and the Pro version will work in Express if you have the VFX lighting add-on with the auto volumetrics effect. And when you open the template, it will, either version, it will open on this notes screen, and it will note that you will require a font called Swiss Cheesed by Matt Chisholm, and there's a link you can copy and paste out of there, but otherwise, I downloaded it off the site famfonts.com, and if you went to famfonts.com and typed in Quantum Leap, then it'll come up, Swiss Cheese by Matt Chisholm, and you'll just be able to download that and install it onto your system. So without further ado, let's take a look at how this template is used. And this is the expressed version of the template. The workflow is exactly the same in both versions. And all you'll need to do is open up this logo type composition. And the logo type is where you will put your actual title text. So I will select the text tool and I'll highlight that and I'll change that to something else. And the first thing we'll see here is that this is a little bit wider than I actually made the comp shot for what I used it for. So I'll just go in and change that from 3,500 pixels across to 3,900 pixels across. Now, if you run into a situation where you need to expand this comp shot, then there is another comp shot called logo style, and logo style is going to be where everything is applied. So with logo style, if you change the size of logo text, you need to change that to match. So we'll just make that 3,900, and then there's a grade layer in here, this layer 7 glow. It just needs to be scaled up a little bit. So now that we've changed that to template leap, we can look into the name type composition, and in the name type composition, all you need to do is go ahead and change that text. You'll notice that the text highlights aren't matching up with the actual text on screen, and that's because there are some baseline adjustments here in the text itself. So that's modifying the text and squashing it down after it's rendered. And this is just Arial black. So we could just change that to presented by long-haired Mike. So once you've changed your logo type and your name type, all you need to do is go into the logo animate comp shot, and this is ready to render out. All the animation, all the special effects are done. There it is. So that's how to use the template, and if all you want to do is plug your names in and get on with it, you're done. But this template was built for 1920 by 1080 resolution and 23.976 frames per second. So if you want to rebuild this template for a different frame rate or a different resolution, then we'll talk about how it's made next. If you're going to build this for yourself, you can always set a different frame rate and project size. You're going to need several comp shots. The first one we're going to call the logo type comp shot, and this is where we're going to set up the actual type. And as you can see here, I got 2 lines of text. For my 1920 by 1080 project, I used a font size of 600. I used a text fill of white. I used a text outline that is 15 pixels wide, set to underfill, and the text outline is black. You'll need a name type layer, and this is just using Arial black. I used 220 points. I'm going to point out here that I changed the baseline scaling to about 74%, and I've changed the scaling of the width to about 70%, so that my text is a little tall and skinny and close together. And we'll take the logo type into another comp called logo style, and the logo style is where we'll make it look like the Quantum Leap logo. So the bottom layer of the logo style comp shot is a copy of the logo type. I've got a blur on it, about 14 pixels, 2 iterations set to clamp to edge. And then there's a set mat above it, and the set mat is using as the source layer this layer called top line fill. It can be any of these other layers that are labeled top line or bottom line. But that's being set to a matte alpha and then a blend replace. So what's happening is the blur is kind of blurring my black and white out, and then the set matte is choking it to fit the original outline of the text so that the blur doesn't extend outside the text, but it all stays inside the original text. And this blur is going to be used as the basis of a parallax effect, and that's what's going to give it the depth. So right above the blurred text, I've got a grade layer that I've called flatten, and this grade layer is going to be used as a source layer for some other effects later on. So now we'll turn on the next two layers, and you'll see this is top line fill and bottom line fill. Let me turn off top line fill for a moment, and I'm going to turn off the blurred layer. So bottom line fill and top line fill, and these are just two copies of the logo type, but they've each got a mask on them so that I've separated each line out so that the leap and whatever the top line is are separated. So that's just boom, boom. And then above that, I've got a grade layer, which has two neon glows, one to set to cyan and one set to a medium blue. So that gives me an all-white fill and then my electric blue glow. So now we'll take a look at this layer 6 and layer 4. These are both doing the same thing. And these are my bottom line and top line bevel. And the effects on that, there's a color gradient set up. I'm using a purple and a dark blue. These colors were sampled from a screenshot of the actual Quantum Leap logo, so they're accurate to what was on the TV series. And then underneath that we have a parallax effect. And the parallax effect is sourcing layer 10, this flatten grade. So that's sourcing our blurred text. And you can't really see what that's doing because my light is off. So as soon as I turn my light on, and now you can see how the blur is giving me this nice beveled edge, and I've got this nice soft bevel. So the next layers we're going to look at is this pair called top line edge and bottom line edge. And I will turn those on, and you can really see what that's doing here on the M and the P in Template Leap. So let's take a look at what these layers are doing, and I'll turn off all my effects again. So I've got a fill color on this layer, and the fill color is just set to a 128, 128, 128 medium gray. And then I've got a set matte. And the set matte is sourcing layer 11, our logo type way down at the bottom. Remember in Hitfilm, when you choose a source layer, it sees the raw state of that layer. So it's looking at that layer before any effects and masks are added, which is why I have this flatten grade up above it. When I set the set matte to the logo type, it's seeing the logo before the blur is added. And you can see here what I'm doing is a matte source of luminance and then a blend of subtract. So what that's doing is taking the white part of my logo type and removing that, punching a hole out and leaving the black outline. So now I've got just the black outline parts of the text, and then I hit that with a parallax effect. The parallax effect is sourcing the same layer as the other parallax effects, and that's giving me my depth. And now I've separated out my blue and my gray bevels, but it's all procedural because it all ties back to this black outline around the white text. On top of this, we have a light layer, and my spotlight is slightly off the top of the frame, angled down to hit the text. I've got a very wide cone angle. Okay, so here we are in my name style comp, and you can see that we have two layers, top line and bottom line. Just like in the logo style comp, there are two copies of the same comp shot with just a mask. Here, I'll turn off the bottom layer. So it's just a mask, so I can separate out both my lines. So I have a color gradient with a light purple and a kind of a grayish purple, and these again are sampled off screenshots of the actual text from the Quantum Leap opening titles. So the color should be correct, and then there's a drop shadow underneath that's kind of a gray. The same gray was sampled from the actual title card itself. So these colors should be accurate and matching to the Season 3 Quantum Leap titles. And that brings us to our logo animate shot. So here we are in our logo animation comp, and we have several elements to deal with. There's a kind of a blue background fog. there are these red light ray things. There's the actual logo animation as it animates in, and then there's the name animation as it wipes in. So we'll start with the blue fog background. And the blue fog background is super simple. It's just a plane, and I put a couple of fractal noises on it, and it's blue, and the seed animates, and there's just a little bit of motion on that as we go back and forth. It might not even show up on YouTube because it's pretty subtle. So now we'll talk about how we make our red lines, and we'll start with this red lines BG layer. And they kind of start and they push to the left and then they fade out. So what that's doing is this bottom line, you'll see here it says grid animation point, and you can see that point here as it moves. All of the lines move with that point. So the point is going to drive all of the red flare line animation. So to build the red lines, we're going to start near the bottom of our stack, and you'll see here that I have this layer called displacement. So I just started with a blob fractal noise, and I set the interpolation to cubic because I wanted these strong blacks, whites, and grays so that I could then blur it out. And at the bottom of the layer, the entire layer has been scaled. You can see that the X scale is 100 and that the vertical scale is something ridiculous like 10 million. And that stretched the entire fractal noise out into these gray lines that stretch all the way from the top to the bottom. Right above the displacement layer, I've got a grade layer called flatten, and flatten is there to be used as a source layer. So now we get to the red lines for the background, and let me turn this layer back on. And we've got a whole bunch of effects here, so let me just start turning them off from the bottom. So we start with the grid effect, and the grid effect is set up so that all of the horizontals are just completely off the top and bottom of the screen, and that I just have a series of vertical lines running across. Next is a displacement effect. The displacement effect is sourcing the flatten layer right above the displacement layer that I made. So I just adjusted the displacement layer and the maximum horizontal displacement to break up the uniformity of the grid lines until I get something that I'm more or less happy with. It just breaks that up so it's a little bit more random. I've got a fractal noise, a blob fractal noise, a block interpolation, and the important thing about that is that the blend is set to multiply. And what that's doing is starting to darken up these white lines. Beneath that, I have a threshold effect. Threshold separates things to pure black or pure white. So I've adjusted the threshold until I've just got little rectangles all throughout the space. Then I've got a demult effect, and the demult is just going to punch everything that's black back to transparent. I've got an angle blur set up, vertical, straight up and down, and now that's taking my rectangles and it's kind of blurring them out a little bit so that they've got some gray values in here. And now the red line layers are the only places where there are differences between the Express and Pro versions of the template. In the Express version of the template, I have a zoom blur, which is punching these gray rectangles out from the center and starting to make them look like light rays. In the Pro version of the template, there is no zoom blur effect here. It just goes straight down to the next one, which is color vibrance. And with the color vibrance, I've added an orange to it to start to blow that out. Here in the Express version of the template is this curves effect, and this curves effect is just really punching up the contrast a bit so that we go from dark to light really, really quickly. And as you can see in the Pro version, we don't have this curves effect. Underneath the curve effects are two glow effects, and that's really just to punch it up some more. These glows are set to use color looping and A/B colors using an orange and a dark orange. In the Pro version of this template, instead of using the zoom blur and the curves and the two glow effects, there is no zoom blur, there is no curves, and instead of the glow effects, we have the auto volumetrics. And that's what's creating our red lines. And then the red lines are animated. There's an opacity fade down here at the bottom. So now we're going to move on to the red lines name plane. And to discuss the red lines name plane, we need to turn everything off and go back down to this layer down at the bottom that says red line name matte plane. So the red lines BG plane is largely driven by this red line name matte plane. And this is a 1920 by 1080 plane. I've unlinked the scale, scaled it down to fit the size of my text, and I've shifted the anchor point over from the center of the plane to this trailing edge. And then you can see that there are keyframes for the position and the scale. And what this is going to do is it's going to move in, and then when it hits the center, the scale is going to animate, this X scale is going to animate, and that's just going to shrink down all the way to 0. And because I moved the anchor point, that's going to cause the plane to shrink along that side. So let me turn on the blue fog and Redline's name again. So Redline's name was a copy of Redline's BG. But what's different about Redline's name is right below the demult, I've put a set mat. And the set mat is sourcing the Redline name matte layer using an alpha mat and then a subtract inverted. So that chokes the red lines to the positioning of that matte plane. And then below that, all the zoom blur, the angle blur, all the stuff to turn my rectangles into light rays. So you can see if I turn this set mat off, bam, it's the whole frame again. And that's not what we want. We just want it to be around the name. So let's look at the name style layer, which is above the red lines. And this layer is just kind of sitting here. I've got a rectangular mask, and then the mask has a feather on it. And all that's happening here is that this mask is animating on, and it just kind of lines up more or less with the red lines, so that as the red lines wipe off, the text wipes on. Boom. Above name style is logo style, and logo style is just animated. There's just some position keyframes on that. And it's really, you know, just kind of moves a little bit to the left, a little bit up, and a little bit back. So that's just animated to be in the background. And when you put it all together, you get Template Leap presented by Longhair Mike.
Like, subscribe, ring the bell. Like, subscribe, ring the bell. Like, subscribe, ring the bell. You are getting sleepy, sleepy.